This is a lecture on Karl Marx's Strange Labor. He is the second master of suspicion that we are studying in class. As I mentioned before, for some weird reason, I took Nietzsche out of your syllabus, but there will be an optional short lecture on Nietzsche as well. That way, we do the three masters of suspicion, and we're sort of doing them in a background chronological way, but I think that it makes a little bit more sense to do them this way. So, anyway, Karl Marx. Who hasn't heard about Karl Marx? Post-Hegelian philosopher, Hegel was one of his big influences. Marx didn't study with Hegel, but when he was in Germany, almost every philosopher had a Hegelian bent to their work. So Marx had to he had to know a lot of Hegel. And Marx is sort of criticized by academic philosophers for not being a philosopher. And and that has to do with the fact that Marx left philosophy in order to do more like politics and economic theory later on. But he definitely started as a post Hegelian philosopher. He worked with Feuerbach, and one of his most influential philosophical works is precisely Thesis on Feuerbach, where Marx tries to refute the way in which Feuerbach talks about Hegel. And later on in many of his works, Marx is coming with a response to the Hegelian problem. So, yeah, he became more of an economic theorist, but he understands philosophy and he is working with all these philosophical underpinnings when he works on historical materialism and the view that our history is dictated not by some supreme origin or manifest theory, if you want to use like manifest destiny, if you want to use the American lingo, but that the conditions of the work, the conditions of production are the ones that set the stage for the historical developments that we're going to have. So that's historical materialism, and in that way, Marx writes in an opposition to Hegelian dialectical materialism, right? Where for Hegel, it was just this well orchestrated, well oiled machine that will always make us progress in order to discover the truth. Marx doesn't think that is possible. He thinks that we discover whatever the means of production or whatever the economic system wants us to discover, that we are ruled by principles of economics, by principles of livelihood, and that's precisely part of the reading that we're going to be doing for this class. That's also part of what sets him on a different footing than many other philosophers, because his philosophy became this transformative and revolutionary power that he wanted the proletariat to claim. It's not that Marx wanted to teach them how to be free or that he wanted to free them. In this way, he follows a Hegelian sense of the master and slave where we have to fight our own battles. So what strive for was this idea that the proletariat could come up with their own liberation, that they would see the power that they have and they would decide to take it away from the means of production. If you have read the Communist Manifesto, that's precisely how the manifesto ends. Workers of the world unite. It's this claim to recognizing the power that the proletariat has. So obviously he was very influential for different branches of knowledge. Philosophy, sociology, anthropology, women's studies have had a very classist, I'll explain that in a second, classist perspective that it's owed to Marxist analysis. Obviously, when we talk about the union movement, we're approaching Marxist ideas and politics. If you think about the Cold War and the the kind of life that existed in our societies from the 50s to the fall of the wall of Berlin. In some way, Marx has been present in all of these things. And it's really interesting because he and his theory have been so misunderstood, right? He writes the Communist Manifesto, which is this really thin pamphlet that only outlines the ideas of what ought to become a workers' movement. He talks there about how communism can only follow capitalism, which is something that many people just didn't, I guess they didn't read. But Marx wasn't against capitalism. It was against capitalism existing forever. And I think that in this society, we can see what the dangers of capitalism were. So Marx thinks that capitalism is a necessary step, but it's only a step. He believed that this way of creating means of production and private property would alienate a lot of the population worldwide. So he didn't think it was a sustainable way of living. That's why he and Engels were part of the communist movement, and that's why they decided that they were going to write this communist manifesto, right? In Das Kapital, the capital for us in English, in the capital, he talks about the way in which the market is going to start leading the decisions that we make, and this market is this he mentions, right, like it's I think it's fascinating to read Marx right now because he talks about how capital is this idea of money and money producing more money, but at some point that money that is being produced is not even tangible anymore. And he starts talking about something that looks a lot like our future market and our derivative market, where we can't even understand how much money or what money goes into that, right? I think Christopher Nolan did a good job in the last Batman movie talking about that problem when they hijack when the bad guys hijack the stocks exchange. What is it that they're really taking? There's this character that says there's no money here, and yet if you do this the whole economy is going to crash. So Marx was very critical of the way in which private property was a given, but a given that nobody has ever explained. Obviously, Marx didn't write the Communist Manifesto alone. He wasn't the only one working in communist ideas. And this is a picture drawing of Karl Marx and Engels. There's this bit of a critique, and I'd rather tell you the critiques of these characters before you hear them from other people and you feel totally like cheated. There's a bit of a critique about Marx because Engels sort of adopted Marx and his whole family. Marx, because of his ideas, his life fell into political turmoil, and he was being attacked in different ways in Germany, so he had to flee, and he left with his family. I think he had 8 kids. He and his wife had 8 kids, so they left for London, where Engels was the one who worked. Engels was the son of an owner of means of production, so Engels became an owner of the means of production, and it was Engels' work that actually helped the Marx family survive. Interesting thing about Engels, though, is that the ideas that you read in the Communist Manifesto were part of the way in which the family industry started working under his control. So those are some of the things that we're going to discuss here. How this really tiny book, that's just like a page of scribbling with Marx's signature at the bottom, and this is my edition of the Communist Manifesto. Um, it's fantastic how this brief pamphlet, it's not even a book, it's a pamphlet, has influenced world history. As I was saying, Marx doesn't say that he is against capitalism. He says that it's a step towards something else, and because it is a step towards something else, he mentions, or they mention, sorry, in the manifesto that peasant countries should not turn to communist beliefs. And Russia and China, which are going to be two of the biggest countries to adopt communism, are at the time when they adopted, they are peasant communities. So Marx and Engels were imagining that the first countries to turn capitalist, I'm sorry, whoa, the first countries to turn communist were going to be England, Germany, maybe France, and they have this line where it's like, maybe America, but we don't know that they're ready. But definitely no one who is a peasant country, because they saw technology as necessary for the survival of communism. So why do they have this critique of capitalism? What is it that they think it does that is going to be part of what he discusses in Strange Labor? Strange Labor is only a piece of his economic and philosophic manuscripts. Strange Labor is the most famous piece out of that collection of essays, but um, if you are interested in reading anything else by him in these manuscripts, please let me know. Um, what he means by estranged, and to me it makes sense with the idea of the young British boys who are cleaning chimneys, right? Estranged means a turning away from something in a hostile way. So Marx wants us to analyze the way in which products are produced. And the reason why for me these essays always connected to the little boy cleaning chimneys is because these kids that age, like the age of the boy in the picture, 5, 6, 7 years old, Charles Dickens writes about this too. Um, they were asked to climb up chimneys in houses, and because they can fit. A grown-up couldn't fit. We didn't have the technology or like the tools to for having a grown-up person clean up the chimney. So they had to do it, and they would climb up the chimney to get all the ashes out so that the people who had the chimneys could operate those when it was cold. Obviously, these kids didn't have chimneys in the places where they lived. A lot of them were orphans or they had been picked up in the streets. And if they died, the sort of census statistical information that we have from back then, however reliable it is, tells us that a lot of these kids died performing their work. But nobody cared because there were a lot of other orphan kids who could do it, right? And if they said they didn't want to do it, then they would just bring somebody else and pay them a sixpence or whatever. So this is one of the things that Marx has in the back of his mind when he is writing about estranged labor and what that is. So that's precisely what we're going to analyze in the next 15 minutes. What strange labor is and what it creates in society.